nearly 10 years since American journalist James Foley was kidnapped in northern Syria, subsequently murdered by ISIS in a public beheading that would make international headlines.
Here with us today to discuss their new book is James's mother, Diane, and author Colum McCann. Thank you both so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it. And Diane, you know, we're saying these words, you're talking about this book because you're talking about your beloved son, Jim. But can you bring us back to James as a person and what he was like?
Jim was our oldest son, and lots of fun, very curious about life and people, loved to read, loved to be read to as a little one, but afterwards always was with a book. And that's actually how I came to know Colum, because he was a great admirer of Colum's work. And Colum was sent this photograph of Jim in a bunker reading his book, Let the Great World Spin. I mean, but that was Jim. He loved to read. He loved stories and was very curious about what people were going through, particularly when the Arab Spring started.
Was he a thrill seeker? Was he a risk taker? Because he put himself in some very difficult and war-torn places.
It's not so much that he was seeking the thrill as seeking to understand, if you will, and wasn't bothered by some of the risk involved. Just incredibly curious.
Because we all remember your son. We all remember where we were. We all remember when the pictures were released of him when he was being held captive. But he was held captive once before, Syria, and that was in Libya for 44 days. What was that? Because you got him back. What was that experience like?
That was the whole... I was very ignorant about how dangerous it is to be a freelance conflict journalist. Totally ignorant. Our younger sons and daughter were in the military at the time. I was worried sick about them, but I was really unaware of how dangerous it was to be a freelancer. So Libya was an incredible wake-up call. I was just, and miraculous that he came home at all, truly.
Did that then make you think, when he was kidnapped for the second time, were you then very optimistic? Did you think, well,
very
we've got through
initially,
this
but it soon was. The second kidnapping was very different. Not witnessed. Nobody knew. He disappeared for 8 months. We did not know if he was dead or alive. It was very different. Whereas the one in Libya had been witnessed by a New York Times reporter, and we knew exactly where he was. It was quite different, but still amazing that he got out. It's so hard when people take people, when they target people like that. Very hard to get people out of those situations.
And he didn't have the might of a big corporation behind him. He was a freelance journalist doing his job in a conflict zone, trying to tell people's stories, which is what you do, Colum. Essentially, your job is telling people's stories. So did you understand the impetus for what it was that James was doing?
Well, I think, James was a number of things. He was a great journalist. I think he had an Irish spirit about him too. You know, he was able to go in places and talk to just about anyone. He could talk to the old man at the corner of the street, the young girl with the backpack walking down the road, but also go in and talk to the politicians and the military leaders. He had this way that he could operate in the world. He wanted to tell the stories of other people. He wasn't interested in himself. He was a conflict journalist in a profound way. And when we saw that iconic photograph, of course, it took all the oxygen out of the air for me. And then to later find out that...
This is the photo of him holding...
No, this is the photo of him being beheaded in the Syrian desert. That was one of those moments when all the oxygen was gone. Later, to sort of establish that we kind of had a relationship with one another through literature was fantastic. And then I got to meet Diane. And this is the bravest woman I have ever come across, who's changed the whole landscape of how we think about hostages, has turned her grief into something powerful and strong. And so to tell that story, to tell her story, and sort of accidentally tell Jim's story at the same time has been a real honor for me.
Can I pick up on that, Diane? How can you bear to think about and discuss what was done to Jim?
I think it's important that the world understands and is protects itself from the hatred that's out there. To be honest, that is just that happened because of a great deal of hatred, and I think we need to be aware of that reality so that we can protect ourselves and others and work together to bridge that. So
But as noble and laudable as that is, any parent listening to you must think this is an unspeakable horror to have to encounter.
It was horror. I mean, we were all very shocked. I don't think even our government was shocked.
As the things that happened.
Yes.
Because I know that you don't want to go into that, but you certainly talk. The book is called American Mother. You talk about it in the book, and you kind of stare at the words on the page, and you're kind of trying to make them make sense in your brain as to what happened to your son, because all this is trickling out to you, and you find out from other hostages,
absolutely,
after the fact of Jim's beheading, what was happening inside. They're sitting down there and listening to that. How was that? You couldn't turn away from it.
No, I really learned more after, and through a friend of Jim's who created the documentary, Jim, the James Foley story. I learned from other hostages what had happened. I didn't know. So it was quite incredible, but sad that they were all together, all of these Western hostages, from France and Spain and Italy and Denmark, and of course the British and the Americans. And yet, instead of working together to bring them all out together, coming together for that effort, everyone did their own thing. So more than half of them were negotiated out by their countries that felt that was a priority. And I was very disappointed that I was really appalled that our country did not prioritize their return.
You were threatened when you were trying to raise ransom. What were you threatened with?
Prosecution
for raising ransom for your son.
Yeah, it was a very low point for us. I couldn't believe it. So, but good things have happened since then. I really think it almost required the shock and the world, viewing the horror of the beheading and to wake our own country up. As an American, I was appalled that we could do better than that. I mean, geez, and we have. President Obama ended up passing a presidential policy directive that created a U.S. first hostage enterprise in the U.S.
You mentioned the kidnappers. One of the things that we want to talk to you about is meeting one of the people who was responsible for your son's death. Just before that, we heard about Jim and his interest in your work, Colum. When you decided to tell this story, had you a sense of trepidation because the difficulty of the story, the rawness of it, knowing that you would have to talk to Diane about some of the most traumatic things that could happen to a person, were you intimidated by that?
No trepidation whatsoever. None whatsoever. Diane found out that one of the killers had he had copped to a plea, and part of his plea agreement was that he would talk to the victims, and Diane wanted to go down and sit face to face. So we went down together to a Virginia courthouse, into a big room, huge windowless room, where there were FBI agents, there were prison authorities, defense, prosecution. She walked to the center of that room. Cody, her son's killer, is sitting there, shackles on his feet. And we sat and talked to him for 2 days, and then a third day, 6 months later. It was one of the most extraordinary human moments certainly of my life. And we had this profound conversation going back and forth about compassion, about forgiveness, about religion, about Jim, about life. It was really quite a moment, right, Dan?
It was. And I don't know why. I just felt compelled to go. I knew Jim would have gone and that he would not have wanted me to be afraid. And I had no doubts about it. However, I wasn't sure I wanted to go alone. And my family wasn't had no interest, none. And so when Colum very generously offered to go, I was so grateful, so grateful, because I knew I had to beat him, and Jim would have wanted me to hear his story, but I, as a mom, wanted to share who Jim was.
Yeah. And what did you feel when you met him?
Well, at first it was quite awkward, Anton, but very quickly, kind of the crowd in the room kind of faded away, as Colum said, and he wanted to share why he had done what he did, and he minimized some of his role, but he also, wanted to emphasize that he was a soldier in the midst of war, and that, but he was willing to listen to me about who Jim was, and so it was quite a grace-filled time, if you will, oddly,
Your son wasn't a combatant,
Right, I reminded him of that.
He wasn't a combatant. And if you're talking about a soldier, whatever people think about the rules of engagement and war and pacifism and everything in this world, in this violent world, did he express remorse to you?
He did.
He did.
To me.
He
did.
Did that mean something to you?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And yes.
It did.
Yeah. I could tell he must be close to
cried.
his mom. Yes.
He cried. He broke down and cried.
Yeah. Particularly when showing us pictures of his little ones, his 3 little girls, whom you'll most likely never see again. And that's the part that was so poignant, is that we all lost. When hatred reigns, everybody loses. Everybody. We lost our Jim. He lost his freedom for the rest of his life, his family, his citizenship, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who he is.
So we all lost.
But you could listen to him and not be blinded by hate and rage and a desire for revenge.
Yeah. That was of God.
Yeah,
not
I think
of me.
Diane has an extraordinary faith.
That was.
Wow. Yeah. You're telling the story of a person that you feel an affinity with, Colum,
right,
but that you've never met.
Right.
And you're with his mum.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we've all got our mums and we want to do them proud. So to tell this story in American Mother, to put it onto the page, how was that? Because I can only imagine the pressure. I can see that there's a bond between the two of you. Yeah. We can all see that.
Yeah.
But Jeannie Max, the pressure to do this.
The thing is, he's still sitting on my shoulder.
Yeah.
There was something about him that I just felt that the first time I met Diane and her husband, they said, "Oh, you remind me a bit of Jim," and the more I got to know him, the more he began to speak to me. So in that moment when we went in to see his killer, he was perched there on my shoulder saying, "Oh, it's okay. Look after my mum. Make sure that there's that he knows who she is and what a proud woman she is." And then Diane came out afterwards and said, "Well, the Holy Spirit entered the room," and for me, that spirit was also the spirit of Jim and the spirit of storytelling, because death will take away a lot of things, but it will not take away your story. And his story exists in the world, and now she's changed the whole political landscape because of the way she deals with hostages and hostage taking.
You set up the Jim Foley Foundation in his memory, and this is specifically about hostages. If something bad should happen, to advocate,
to advocate for our nation, to prioritize the return of innocent people, innocent citizens, when they're taken hostage or targeted. Solely because they're an American, not because they've done anything wrong, and to protect journalists, but also to inspire a moral courage. Jim has challenged me big time, to do the best I can to make a difference, to continue his spirit of goodness, if you will.
Well, you're delivering on that. It's the most remarkable story and written by, of course, a remarkable author, Colum McCann.
It's stunning.
Foley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is absolutely stunning. The book is called American Mother. It's an important book. Thank you both so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank
you
so much. Thank you.